Pessoal, bom dia. Eu estou aqui com o professor Andrea Maraschi, que é da Università de Bologna. Ele vai apresentar um pouco sobre o trabalho dele, que é muito relacionado às sagas e principalmente à alimentação na era viking. É um prazer, inclusive, estar aqui com ele e recebê-lo, porque é um tema que eu gosto bastante, essa da questão da alimentação. Professor, thank you so much for be here in the channel and show a little more about your work. So we can start to question you on how do you start your interest in the Viking Age, in about foods in the Viking Age. Is a part of your work in your career?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks, Marcia, for having me. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you, and it's great to know that the interest in the Viking Age, in Old Norse material, is so thriving in Southern America. That's great. And I know a few people working there, and keep up the good work, guys. So I will use some slides, maybe in a minute, just to allow our listeners to, have a better grasp on what I'm gonna talk about. But just for the sake of this beginning, I will just say that my interest in Old Norse material, in the Viking Age, in the Icelandic sagas, the Eddas, and all that, began no sooner than my PhD years, because I started my studies in Bologna, and I had already this passion for medieval studies, but my first research focus was food history, like purely food history in Latin Europe, continental and Southern Europe. And that is because in Bologna I had a chance to meet a famous professor in the field of food history, who is Massimo Montanari. And when I started following his lectures, I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. And so I began my research career, and I published my first articles in the field of food history. So I started with summer geography, and then during my PhD, I started working on medieval wedding banquets, because at the time he told me that was a really unexplored area of medieval studies. And so my interest in the Viking Age and in medieval Scandinavia, began at the point. I'm gonna show you a few slides just to give you an idea of what happened to me when I was your age and I was starting my PhD. So let me know if you see my slides. So I want to show you more practically how things happened. Do you see them?
No, the screen are black.
Okay, let's just wait a few seconds, because it always takes a little bit of time to load. But anyways, so I was working at nothing yet. You can't yet see it?
No, the screen is black.
The screen is black. That's really okay. Let me try again. Just pardon me, but it worked a few seconds ago, so let's try and do this instead. Might work.
Now it's okay.
Now it's okay. Great. So I wanted to show you the place where this happened, because it's a wonderful place with the oldest university in the world, Bologna. So a very important one as well. So this is where I studied, and where I also started my PhD when I was pretty much your age. And as I said, I dedicated those years to the study of food-related rituals in medieval marriage. So what people ate, what people drank, in order to maybe ratify marriage or in order to celebrate marriage in continental and southern Europe. That was my main focus. Now, the problem with this topic is that sometimes sources, Latin sources, can be slightly disappointing depending on what you're really aiming for there. Because most of the times you find descriptions of banquets. Actually, you don't find descriptions of banquets, but you merely find like sources saying that maybe this king was marrying this queen, and they celebrated a wedding banquet, and that was it. So it can be quite disappointing. So of course I'm simplifying it here, but I felt like I wanted to discover more about those rituals, and that's where I decided that I should take a look at the Icelandic sagas. So as I said, I was coming from food history. I was focusing on medieval wedding banquets. I was trying to like eviscerate the role of banquets and of toasts in medieval marriage, but I felt like I needed something more. And then I realized that Icelandic sagas, with all the problems that they present, with all the issues that you encounter when you use them, because as you know better than me, you can't use all the sagas as historical sources because many of them are not really reliable. Some of them are partly reliable, so it's a very complex work. But on the other side, you find many details concerning banqueting and concerning wedding banquets specifically. So I started looking into some of the sagas. This is a very brief list of the sagas I read in those years, and as you may notice, some of them are family sagas, some of them are fornalarsögur. So again, it was very complex because you need to pay a lot of attention to what you're going to find, and you need to always have in mind why that author decided to tell that story. What was his purpose? Okay, he may have just wanted to entertain the public. He may have wanted to entertain the public, but also to tell a reliable, credible story. So you gotta ask your questions. And what I found was that in many of these sagas, authors were really paid a lot of attention to the role of food and drink in marriage. And just to sum it up for you, to make a long story short for you, you notice that in the sagas, people drank together, so they made toasts to ratify betrothals. And then they ate together, they arranged banquets to get married. So this is the main framework that you find in the sagas. That's very interesting because you may say, well, we still do that, so that's nothing groundbreaking about that. But the difference is that they were pretty much content with that. So drinking together and eating together was basically sufficient for people to get betrothed and then get married. Of course, you needed witnesses. Authorities wanted you to celebrate these marriages in public, and they wanted, maybe in other parts of Europe, they wanted you to have like notaries that would write down the amount of the dowry you would give your bride-to-be, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, these were norms that concerned like important people, like the aristocracy, right? But common people, for the most part, got married by drinking and eating together. And this is the power of food. This is the power of eating together as human beings do. Because think for a moment, what is the best way to simultaneously celebrate a feast, to witness a feast, to make the public, the community aware of your feast? That's exactly eating together. That's what eating together is for. So in the sagas, more than in many other sources, there emerges this idea that eating together is sufficient to like ratify this fundamental event in the life of many people at the time. So creating a new family. This is the power of eating together. But curiously, the sagas, so saga authors were not interested in telling you what they would eat, what these people would eat, what they would drink. But they paid a lot of attention in telling you where people sat exactly, how the banqueting halls were structured. This is quite curious if you think about it, because as students, we would really like to know what people were eating during these feasts, but they won't tell us, unless a few details here and there, but these are very minute details. But for the most part, we know where this guy sat, where this other guy sat, who was on the right side, who was on the left side, who was, on the most important table, which is basically this one, on the short side of the hall, and it was on a higher like days, these are the details that you find in the sagas and are very, very interesting. So that's where and when my love for these sources sprang up, really. And from then onward, I realized that maybe I should pay attention to Icelandic sagas a bit more. And I was lucky enough that after finishing my PhD in Bologna, I got a postdoctoral fellowship in beautiful Reykjavik, so the place where you want to go if you want to study the sagas. And luck plays always a huge role in our career. So you got to be ready for it, but it's an important component of our career. And I was really blessed to have the chance to go to the Árni Magnússon Institute, because not only I could getting a better grasp of what this wealth of sources really was like. A thing is to study Icelandic sagas from Italy, a thing is to study it from the place where they were produced, or among people who know them very, very well, much better than us in Italy. And furthermore, I had the chance to meet a lot of colleagues that were incredibly helpful, amazing people who helped me, finding my path. So it was a tremendous experience. I encourage all of you students to visit the Árni Magnússon Institute in Reykjavik, because it's like terrific place, and also you are really close to many of the locations that are mentioned in the sagas. So bear this in mind. And so as a result, my original interest in food history, which I was bringing with me from Italy, from Bologna, like exploded. And in Italy and in a few other countries, we have a little bit of a problem in academia among medievalists, because, for example, cultural history is not really like considered an important field of study. I don't know why.
That's interesting. I think it was Italy was one of the places that most you would like to study culture, but this is a very curiosity.
Yeah, it's curious because on the one hand, you have some brilliant historians that study cultural history, but on the other hand, the majority of medievalists prefer dealing with topics like church history or political history or Italian cities in the late Middle Ages. These are all great topics, but cultural history is like considered a class B topic. This is very, very unfortunate. So, for example, you can study magic and witchcraft in Italy, but it's very, very hard. Very hard. They're not gonna make it easy for you. So I didn't develop this interest while I was in Italy, but when I was in Reykjavik, there I found that there were many, many brilliant scholars who were encouraging me, in widening my interests, in the field of working with Old Norse material, with Scandinavian material. I could mention Stephen A. Mitchell, a famous scholar for what concerns, among other things, the history of witchcraft and magic, Hans Jakob Orning, or in Reykjavik, in her own way, Adalheidur Gudmundsdóttir. So there are many, many inspiring figures that like help me directly or indirectly open up towards magic. Now, a fair question would be, how can you, fit your interest in food history with the interest in magic? Where is the like fil rouge between these two subfields? And the common ground between food and magical remedies is that in the medieval past, magical and medicinal remedies, I'm going to delve into this a little bit more in a moment, but just for the sake of being brief now, a magical recipe is not so different than a food recipe, because most of the magical recipes or so-called magical recipes, many medical recipes as well, were made with food and with herbs, of course. But food was cooked in the same place as where you made magical and medicinal remedies, the kitchen. So there's not a lot of distance between cookery and magical or medical practice. I'm talking about a popular level, of course. So common people or popular healers would prepare their remedies pretty much in the kitchen, so using some foods and some herbs. So this development in my interests was pretty natural, I would say. But then new problems arose, because not only if you're interested in magic, you have to deal with what I mentioned earlier. So with the problem of working with sagas or with other sources, because I also used handbooks of magic, collections of charms, lich books. So these are specific sources with their specific context, but you also want to use Icelandic sagas because they provide you with a rich context of details. But the problem with sagas is that, again, can you really trust descriptions of magical practices? It's really hard. So you have to study a lot, and also you have to take into account that if you want to study magic in medieval Scandinavia, but more in general in medieval times, you gotta dismiss this word and this notion of magic. You don't want to use this word because this does not exist in the past. And as anthropologists taught us in the last decades, you can't really think of magic in the past as a specific thing that is different, completely far removed from religion, and in turn completely far removed from science. So magic, religion, and science are really like blend in the past. You can't neatly distinguish between what is purely magical, what is merely religious, and what is science. So the borders between these domains of knowledge are really fluid. It's really hard. So the first thing you want to do is avoid using the word magic and the word science and the word religion. You want to really look at the sources from what is called an anemic perspective. So from the inside, not from the outside. You don't need to be biased. And the problem with this is that, we are children of a society, of a culture that is based on modern science. So our idea of magic is the idea of something that is delusional, doesn't work, right? We don't believe in magic. So if we want to study the past, we gotta change this attitude, and we gotta think that they believed in magic or so-called magic. So we gotta respect what they told us about it, and we gotta really pay attention to the words they used, like seidr, like fjölkingi, Poldomor, and many others. So you want to avoid using the word magic and pay attention to the original Old Norse sources. But I'm going to give you a few examples later. So when I was in Reykjavik doing my postdoc, I stayed there 3 years. So I had the chance to developed this interest in so-called magic, just for the sake of making things easier for us now. I will use the word magic, but please don't use it in your studies. And so I looked into sagas, looked into, again, leech books and handbooks of magic, a little bit of archaeology as well. And from there, I started to pay attention to the basic rationale underneath magic and medicine in that era, in those places. And this rationale is called sympathy. So you may have heard this word in anthropology. This is quite commonly known as sympathetic magic. So the idea that everything is linked with something else in the cosmos, and herbs, trees, stones, parts of your bodies, animals are linked with stars, planets, the moon, constellations, and so forth and so on. So the main idea is that you can create potions or filters or recipes using herbs, using parts of animals, using formulas, written or oral formulas, we'll talk about that later, in order to create like recipes that have some kind of link of sympathy or antipathy with something else. And so you can pretty much obtain whatever result you want if you know the occult properties of natural things. But the important thing here is that this is not a peculiarity of medieval Iceland, not a peculiarity of medieval Scandinavia. This is not a peculiarity of magical practices. This is something that we see in science, with inverted commas, in religion, with inverted commas, in magic, with inverted commas, in all Europe at the time, in much earlier centuries. Actually, we find this notion of sympathy, of a sympathetic universe, everywhere already among the Neoplatonic philosophers, Stoic philosophers. We find it pretty much since the very first traces of civilization. We find it in Arab natural magic. We find it in European natural magic, medieval European natural magic. It's not surprising to find it in medieval Iceland. So it's very important to bear in mind the idea of a sympathetic universe when you study magic in Icelandic sagas, or in Icelandic and Norwegian and Swedish and Danish handbooks of magic or leech books. This is one of the most important rationale behind all of these sources. I like to call it a theory of everything of the Middle Ages, because you find it everywhere. And food is important. Drink and foods are important because, as I said, in a sympathetic universe, you want to like trigger effects that are really powerful. You want to absorb properties that are occult in nature. And the best way to absorb properties is to eat them or to drink them. Just a very basic example, but if you want to be as brave as a lion, you want to eat his heart, right? This is a very banal thing. There are, plenty of literary motifs surrounding the eaten heart stories. Okay, but this is something that we find even in, in leech books and in handbooks of magic. Maybe not heart eating, but practices that reflect that same attitude. So it's very interesting just to see, again, a strong common ground between Icelandic sagas, mostly fornalagsögur, because magical practices are often described in sagas that feature a little bit of fantastic elements. So fornalagsögur to a greater extent than family sagas or other sagas. And so yeah, you got to really respect these sort of descriptions, because they reflect a medieval attitude that people had. So by the way, feel free to interrupt me, because if I start talking, I may keep on for hours.
I was waiting you talk because it was very interesting, the topic. One of the the most of the sagas show us some scenes of banquets, some about foods, magic. This is a very interesting. You gave the examples of one's very good sagas like Ragnar Saga, Inglinga Saga,
Yeah.
and I was interested to know what's the from one of the that sagas that you see much appear about the descriptions of food and the relationships of family magic. I know that Inglinga Saga have a lot of these and many conflicts of in family,
Yeah.
and that was very interesting. But I want to know, from your perspective, what one of the sagas that most show this content.
I would have said Ingliga Saga myself because I remember it's very rich. But let me just take a look because I don't remember them all. It depends on what you're interested in. But speaking of, for example, a few sagas like Laxaila Saga, Vatsnaila Saga, they provide specific details like when you should arrange a wedding banquet, exactly when, which is very peculiar compared to other sagas because you can't like fix a date for your wedding randomly. A wedding is a very, very important and unique feast. So you want to have you want to have plenty of food to offer to your guests. That's fundamental. So they tell you that the best moment to arrange a banquet is like X weeks. It can be like 4 weeks, can be 7 weeks, can be 3 weeks after the end of summer. Basically, when your larders are full. So basically before autumn sets in, which makes a lot of sense. So these sagas, I remember, provide these sorts of details. Other sagas could be, Njál Saga for sure, probably Ragnar Saga as well, Hervar Saga as well, if I remember correctly. I may be wrong because I worked with them a long time ago, but if I remember correctly, they are more interested in telling you details about people seats. So as I told you, so you know that this guy is going to sit in the most important place in the bench, and the most important place in the past is the central spot, like this one, for example. Or of course, aside from the most important table, but let's pick a normal table on the long side of the room. So the center spot is the most important. Of course, the second most important place is the one to his right. The third most important is the one to his left, and then you proceed forward. So as far as I remember, the sagas I mentioned were more careful in describing where people would sit. So while Volsunga Saga, aside from giving a lot of details about magic for obvious reasons, so sympathetic magic is a very, very important theme in Volsunga Saga for the eating of the heart, the eating of the heart most specifically. But you also find example of magical filters of some kind. In Volsunga Saga, as far as I remember, you find examples of the importance of eating together, of ratifying the marriage by merely eating together. So in Old Norse, you have a few ways to say that you're going to get married. And one of them is drekka brudlaup, which literally means drinking together, drinking the marriage. So it's as if you're saying that in order to get married, you have to drink together, and that, equals getting married. It's a wonderful example of the power of sharing that moment together that remained like fixed in language. That's amazing, in my opinion, because it doesn't happen in many languages, but it happened in Old Norse. And that, I believe, reflects the importance that this ritual had in that culture, possibly to a greater extent than in some other societies, for example, in medieval Southern Europe as well. So yeah, that's amazing. It remained fixed also in English, as far as I remember, because the English word bridal comes from bride ale, which literally means ale for the bride, ale for the marriage, because of course specific ales were brewed for medieval weddings. So a word that people, don't know, they don't know where it comes from, bridal. We often use it as a synonymous of nuptial nowadays, but it actually comes from bride ale. And so in English as well, you find this importance of drinking or eating together for weddings. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
No, perfect. Yes, you answer. It's amazing because we can solve that the banquet. It's a moment from a very special reunion that we saw the political alliances. We
Yeah,
saw that the marriage principally is very appear a lot. Um, Example, and we have example in Ingliga Saga, an episode of Scialdi that have a marriage, but he was forced to marry to this man and have the banquet, and she is how can I say, he saw that the man was very drunk, that the man that he's married, and she can take the situation to kill him to can be free from
yeah,
this man. And this is very interesting because we saw that the banquet was appear in a motive um to solve the conflict in
yeah, yeah.
the for the situation.
And that's very important within the context of marriage. I'm happy that you brought up this example, because so you mentioned an important aspect, which, for example, Vidar Paulson explored in an important book, which he published a few years ago. So strengthening social bonds. Okay, that's one of the reasons why you want to, arrange a banquet. But when you're marrying someone else, the most important aspect, not only you want to invite the guests that are important for you and relevant to you, and so you want to strengthen social bonds, but the most important aspect of a wedding banquet is that you want to publicly manifest that two people are creating a union and a family. And I am stressing this aspect because that was the moment when a woman, for example, could sometimes express her denial to the union, and she could do that publicly. So it was not like something that she made in secret. You wanted to show society or the relevant members for your family and for society that you did not agree to that union. And since that was an important event that had to be publicly showed, you wanted to do that in public. So again, when is the perfect moment to do so? When many people are gathered together. When does it happen? During a banquet. So as you can see, we human beings go far beyond the role of food as something that we need to eat. We like enrich the practice of eating and drinking together with many other meanings that are really relevant from a social perspective, and from a legal perspective also, because marriage had a legal relevance as well. So yeah, that is a very interesting example, the one you brought up.
Thank you. That's a lot interesting because when I saw this specific episode, that the woman used the situation of the banquet to be benefited by that, kill the man that she don't love, and the man kill her father to take the throne. And it's a very interesting perspective that we saw the banquet and we saw the situation was created by all this mess that was drinking and that was eating, and that's a very, very interesting.
Exactly. One more aspect that emerges in a few legendary sagas, actually, very few legendary sagas, is the behavior at the table. So when we think about eating behaviors in the past, we gotta realize that people, first of all, they were eating with their hands, which is not a trivial detail to take into account. I did it because I am lucky enough here in Italy to be a like occasionally a scientific consultant for a very important company of historical reconstruction. So they are really great at reconstruct historically reliable banquets. So they invite me every now and then, and I can eat medieval recipes and eat in the
Wow.
medieval way. So only with my hands and all that. So this is important because when you eat with your hands, you have a different behavior. If you use cutlery, you want to, or I should say, it's like the opposite. It's like the reverse. Cutlery makes you a different human being because you keep your hands clean. You are more educated from our own perspective. Like you are like more polite at the table from our own perspective. But I'm not stating that our model is better. I'm just saying that it's different, and it got different because, well, Norbert Elias, showed us how and when it became different in some famous works of his. So during not earlier than the 17th century. But before that, for a long time, people ate with their hands, and that really changes you. Because when you eat with your hands, you allow me to use this expression, but you look a little bit more like an animal. Because eating with your hands, well, we experience that nowadays with fast foods, which are very tasty, maybe also because we use our hands. So we have a stronger and deeper relationship with what we are eating. So we like unleash our more animal-esque part of our being at the table. And I'm telling you this because a few foredragshöger describe what could happen at the end of these meals. So after people were eating a lot of meat because that was what you wanted to eat to prove you were a strong warrior, you wanted to eat a lot of roasted meat for the most part with your hands, and then they could play bone throwing. So they would, after eating these huge animals, they would start throwing these huge bones at each other with violence. So they could be very violent, and some sagas say that people would like break their own bones, like their own face or their hands, by throwing these animal bones at each other. So again, these are foredragshöger, so you want to take them with a grain of salt. But having experience of what it is like to eat with your hands, I don't struggle to think that these sort of behaviors could not be so rare in a society where people behaved in a different way at the table. So that's also very interesting in my opinion.
Yes, and you show a very interesting perspective because I think when we eat with hand, I don't know if the kings in the epoch or in the time feel the same, but we feel a sensation of power. I don't
Yeah.
know if it makes sense for you that you have this experience to eat with hands, but we feel the sensation of eating and show us our power to eating very aggressive, like example of the god Thor. Example,
Yeah.
he is eating with hands and with aggressive, and he eating a lot, drinking a lot, and he showed this. He can appear very powerful doing this when we saw.
Precisely, and that is another good example, because one might say, well, but that is a mythological tale, so not really reliable. But that is a Germanic, very, very ancient Germanic traditional value, eating a lot to prove that you're stronger. That is not something that somebody made up in the 13th century. That is something that we already find in early medieval sources, which addressed the behavior of Germanic peoples. And we know that because the Latin society, so the Romans, before the Germanic migrations, had a very different approach to food. They also ate a lot, of course, but their most important cultural value was moderation at the table. And that is a principle that comes from ancient Greek and from Hippocrates. So you want to eat very little and to eat very specific things, and you want to avoid to indulge in meat, because it depends on your, they would call it temperament. So it's a complex story, but it's called dietetics. So it was a science. And the Romans endorsed this view of diet and of dietetics. So they had this idea of moderation that we find in many biographies of great generals like Caesar or Alexander the Great, and many Roman emperors as well. But then when Germanic peoples migrated towards Central and Southern Europe, and they become protagonists in Latin sources, you can immediately see that their attitude towards food was the opposite. They didn't predicate moderation, but they predicated exactly what you said, exactly what you see in the case of Thor. They predicated voracity, the value according to which you want to eat the most, you want to eat meat to prove that you are the best on the battlefield, and to prove that you are the most valuable warrior, and so the most fitting ruler. Charlemagne was depicted by his biographer Heynard as a great meat eater. Lombard generals, Lombard princes were described as great meat eaters, and I could, of course, go on because the list is quite long. So what we see in Old Norse mythology with the gods is reliable, because we see that in Germanic culture already like 6-7 centuries earlier.
Yes, I totally agree. It's a very, very interesting point from that, because the banquets are, I think, are a very demonstration of power, and a very interesting thing to see, because we don't saw the food sometimes from the aspect of the persons that are in a banquet. Sometimes I think we forget to study this part of the situation of the banquets, because having a very anthropological context around the situation.
True. Key point you made. If you want to delve deeper into food-related topics, you have to build up a strong anthropological background, because anthropologists developed their interest in food before the historians did. So we have a lot to learn from them. So yeah. And do you want me to proceed forth with my
Yes, we can proceed.
with my experiences? So just to introduce you to some of the lines of research that I developed during the 3 years that I worked in at the University of Iceland. As you can see, there's quite a lot of them, and that is exactly the result of working in an international, inspiring, and also relaxing environment. So I will always be thankful to to all the excellent scholars working at the Árni Magnússon Institute, because it's thanks to them that I became more curious. And so one of the first things that I developed my interest into when I wanted to focus on magic was the role that food had in divination. Divination, again, I don't want to use this word because it's a modern word, so I should use the word seidr, which is the Old Norse word that you more commonly find in the sources associated with divinatory powers. And I immediately found that food was fundamental in seidr. But I'm gonna address this topic in a moment. I'm gonna show you a more practical example, and I will show you also because why when I started studying divination, so seidr and food, I had to study gender studies as well. Had to learn a little bit more about gender as well, because most of the times when you find examples of seidr, you also bump into women practicing seidr. So you want to know a bit more about the role of women in in the Viking Age, in medieval Iceland, and so on. So that was a very interesting turning point that I took in my career, and which allowed me to publish a few works I'm very proud of. Speaking of food, I became a lot interested in uncommon foods or even taboo foods. So human meat, for example, but also horse meat, as I will show you in a moment. But most importantly, graphophagy, which literally means eating words. And graphophagy is an essential, though pretty rare, but still essential technique that we find in leech books, that we find in collections of charms from medieval Scandinavia. But if you think about it, you also find it in some Icelandic sagas. If you read Egil Saga or sagas where you find descriptions of the power of runes, you get exactly what I mean here. As Nicholas Mailan called it, the extra linguistic power of words. This is a principle that seems to have been quite common in pre-Christian Scandinavia, and that remained in Christian Scandinavia. It remained in the sources, as I said, in leech books and in handbooks of magic, and in texts that feature a little bit of medicine, of science, medicine, a little bit of magic, so that combine these domains of knowledge. So that's really, really interesting, because you may wonder, how can you absorb the power of words? Well, you can drink them for a start. So, or you can drink something as somebody else recites a formula. And yeah, I will get back to this in a moment. Then I was lucky enough to meet Ármann Jakobsson, whom I believe you know, one of the greatest experts in the Icelandic sagas, and he is also pretty famous among scholars of medieval Scandinavia, because he's an expert in Draugr, and yeah, we worked on that too. And I also worked with cultural memory and medievalism, but I will show you practical examples in a moment. I'm sorry if these slides may look a little bit self-referential, but it's just to provide you with some specific examples of how I worked with these topics. So I was speaking about divination, seidr, and supernatural strategies in general to overcome situations of crisis like famine. Well, I was in Leeds in 2016 with some colleagues from Iceland, and we had a panel there which was addressing these topics, and I presented this paper, Hunger Games, which was later published in Archiv for Nordic Philology. And that was an example of how I worked with this material. And I think the most interesting point that I tried to make was that, Iceland, for example, was converted to Christianity around 1000 AD. What happens to people when a society converts to Christianity? So the first thing is that there is a gap between the top of the hierarchy converting to Christianity and common people who are not going to convert like starting from day one. They are going to stick to their traditional deities for quite some time. But most importantly, they're going to stick to their traditional customs for quite some time. And in sagas that are set, around the year 1000, you can definitely see how people behaved as Christianity was spreading in their lands. And you notice that, I'm thinking about Erik Saga Rauda, for example, when there's this beautiful description of a sailor in chapter 4 with this vulva named Thorbjörg. And you can definitely see that there were some Christians among them and some pagans among them. And they were not really sure what to do because, they were in a situation of famine. They were in Greenland. They were, at the beginning of winter. So what to do? Should we invoke the powers of the Christian God? Should we invoke the power of the pagan gods? What should we do? And they decided that it should be better in that case, to rely on Seidr, which was, of course, a pagan practice. And even Christians decided that it was better to do so, even if they had already converted to Christianity. So what I wanted to show is that as faith changes around people, people's needs do not change. So they might simply choose new gods or new entities to, invoke, but their basic needs do not really change. So they're gonna keep, fearing about famine. They're gonna keep being anxious about their larders being empty, or about the weather destroying the fields, or about their livestock getting sick. So what changes is just the way they have to help themselves. It's just the entities that they're gonna invoke. That's why sagas that are set around 1000 AD are really, really interesting in this sense. And so that is a topic that I started exploring with this paper and with this publication here. But then I also realized that when your society converts to a new religion like Christianity, you have some advantages. So, for example, you have a new god, who maybe is more powerful than your ancient gods. Who knows? You can try. But you also have new rules to follow. And in the case of Christianity, these rules are plentiful because for Christian Catholics, the church had imposed about 150 days every year to when you should fast. And fasting means, most importantly, avoiding meat, which is a hard thing to ask to people living in areas like Iceland or Norway or Sweden or Greenland, because you don't have a lot to eat there. You don't have the amount of cereals that you have in Southern Europe, for example. So meat is an essential part of your diet. But the Christian Church wants you to avoid meat once every 3 days on average. So that's a very, very hard norm to abide by. But not only that, because if you know Iselingabok, if you know Ari Thorgilsson, you also know that when, according to him, when Icelanders converted to Christianity, they were allowed to continue eating horse meat, but for a very, very brief period of time. after that time, horse meat became a taboo food. And again, Icelanders had eaten horse meat for quite a long time. They still eat horse meat for a long time, but the church banned it because, according to some sources from continental Europe, horse meat was kind of considered a quasi-taboo, maybe because it was associated with pagan sacrifices. We don't really know it because sources are not really clear about that, but that's what we can infer. So again, you have advantages, but you also have disadvantages when you convert to another religion. So in this study, I studied the impact that Christianization had in terms of food choices. And it's quite a huge impact. But on the other side, you also find out that in magical, with inverted commas, magical and medicinal practice, if you're a Christian, you now have more products that you can use that are quite powerful. For example, the host, so the sacramental bread that Christians use during the Eucharistic liturgy. Or you have Christian prayers. So in late medieval Scandinavian leech books and handbooks of magic, you find Christian prayers accompanied by other things, by other non-Christian elements or non-Christian formulas, and all of them work together to create very, very powerful remedies. So again, Christianity takes something from you, but also gives something to you. And you have to bear in mind that these uses of the host or of the paternoster in a medical or magical context were not allowed by the church, but still people use them. And we are sure about it because, again, these are not elements that you find in the sagas, but it's these details you find in manuscripts of magic and medicine. So we can be pretty sure that people use those remedies and believe in their power. So this is a curious aspect of the Christianization. And yeah, this is exactly the work I mentioned before, and the episode that I mentioned before in Erik Sagarauda. I was very lucky to publish this paper in the first issue of a Brazilian journal. I'm sure you know, Scandia,
Yes.
which encourages cultural history and these sort of topics. So I'm pretty proud of this study because, again, Erik Sagarauda offers you this perspective of on settlers in Greenland around 980s. So just before the Christianization of Iceland, but when Christianity had already arrived in Scandinavia. So some people already converted. And so what to do when you are in a situation of famine? What are you going to do? Are you going to recite a paternoster, or are you going to call for the help of a volva like Thorbjörg here? And as I said, in Erik Sagarauda, the volva has the role of protagonist, and it's an amazing description because not only we have archaeological evidence that women like her might have existed, but also that food has an essential role in Seder because, notably, Thorbjörg is served a porridge of milk and all the hearts of the animals that were living in the area. And this, in my own opinion, I might be wrong, of course, but in my opinion, is an example of sympathetic eating, because one of the key aspects of sympathetic thinking in the past is that the most distinctive and important quality of an individual, be it a human or an animal, is in its heart. So as I told you before, a lion is famous for being brave. So if you eat the heart of a lion, you're going to be brave. You're going to become brave. But many other animals, like birds, for example, were associated with knowledge of the future. You see that about, Sigurdur, the dragon Fafnir. That's exactly what happens there. By eating the heart of a dragon, which, by the way, is related with birds. Traditions said that dragons were related with birds. Sigurdur can understand what's going to happen in the future. So what happens here is exactly the same. These prophetess eats the animals of these, the hearts of these animals, and she's able, in my opinion, to learn about the future. So to learn about when the famine would end. So this is a saga that scholars could say is not really reliable, but this specific ritual, in my opinion, reflects the sympathetic thinking that was so widespread in the past. So, in my opinion, retains a grain of truth in itself. It's an amazing thing. And I assume that you might be also, a fan of Tolkien, maybe, as many, exactly, as many students of Viking stuff or Germanic material are, for obvious reasons. And there's a reason why I picked this frame from the Hobbit movie here, depicting trolls, because in some Fornaldarsögur we also find depictions of trolls. Not very easy to work with trolls because, as Ármann Jakobsson himself shows, trolls can be depicted as both positive or very negative beings in the sagas and in mythological materials, because they are also related to human beings. They are the ancestors of human beings. So it really depends on the context. But in many Fornaldarsögur that I studied, trolls are, in my opinion, like Polyphemus in Greek tradition. They are caricatures of human beings. They are monstrous versions of human beings. And what do trolls do in the sagas? Aside from killing humans, of course, they eat human meat and they eat horse meat. This is their diet. So we learned that that horse meat was banned after the Christianization of Iceland. Not immediately, but after a few years. So that became a taboo. Of course, human meat was already a taboo. So these trolls, in my opinion, are just depictions of like pre-Christian, barbarian, inhabitants of Scandinavia. That's my theory that I proposed in this article, because they practice Seder. They practice Seder to attract their victims, their human victims, or mostly human victims, and then kill them and eat them. And again, they eat horse flesh. So they are depicted as pagan idolaters who eat banned foods that were banned by Christianity, by the Christian Church. So they represent the otherness, so the uncivilized ones. And I believe they work perfectly as a metaphor, an allegory for otherness. And food, as you can see, is an essential element for depicting otherness and the idea of civilization, as opposed to that. It's always been like that. Earlier we mentioned, Caesar, Alexander the Great, Charlemagne. All of these important figures were described, among other things, on the basis of what they ate. Then their biographers also tell us how they, dressed and everything else they did in their lives. But one of the key aspects of their identity, what was they were eating, because there is a correct way of eating and there is an incorrect way of eating, and that this is of course relative for any culture. So the Romans thought that moderation was your key identity marker. And in fact, Caesar, Alexander the Great, and other great figures are described as very temperate at the table. Germanic peoples believed that abundance and voracity were important positive markers. And so Charlemagne is described as a sort of a bear on the table, can eat incredible amounts of meat. And in this case, trolls are described as human and horse meat eaters. And this really contributes to identifying them as beasts, as monsters, as idolaters. So are people who are other than Christians, of course. So this clearly is a very biased depiction of reality, but it's what it is. And just a couple of words on my other experiences. So I mentioned my work on Draugr, thanks to Ármann Jakobsson and also to Miriam Maybert, because in those years when I was in Iceland, they were editing this beautiful, beautiful volume that you see here. And I was lucky to be invited to contribute. And again, this was another chance to show how food is incredibly rich of inspiration. You don't want to limit yourself to thinking that food can only study with attention to recipes. No, there's so many other topics that intersect food. Even Draugr. In the case that I studied in Irbige Saga, this Draugr, Þórgunna, comes back from the world of the dead just to cook a meal to her corpse bearers, a group of men who were, transporting her corpse to Skálholt. And she came back from the dead just because these men were helping her, of course, and they bumped funnily enough, into a snowstorm in Iceland. That should not surprise us. And they find refuge at a farmer's house, but this farmer is quite rude and, doesn't honor hospitality, so it doesn't give them anything to eat and anything to wear, anything dried to wear. And so, we have Draugr coming back from the dead. And this example was very important because with this book, we wanted to rediscuss our idea of paranormal encounters. So this is what students need to understand when you want to study the medieval past or the past in general. So you want to study magic, you want to really be careful about the notion of magic, as I told you before. You want to study Draugr, ghosts, revenants, zombies. You want to be really careful about these words, about the idea of paranormal encounters, because our idea of ghosts or paranormal encounters is so different from the idea that medieval people had of these encounters. And so this book had the specific aim of rediscussing and contextualizing the idea of the concept of paranormal in medieval Iceland, so that it was a very, very important exercise, so to speak. So let me know if we have a little bit more time. I've got a few more things to add if I can, but
yes, you can continue. It's very, very interesting. I was very interested in that.
Yeah, just a few more things, just to give you an example of what I was mentioning earlier. This is just one of the works that I published concerning graphophagy in medieval Scandinavia. So these here are some of the manuscripts that I studied. Some of them are leech books, so purely manuscripts purely devoted to medicine. So we don't find anything related to magic there. But some other manuscripts are like a little bit of combination of medicine and magic. That's why I told you that we should never use these words, because clearly people at the time didn't think that medicine and magic were separated. Most of them, or some of them, used them together. So they used the power of Christian prayers, the power of herbs, the power of planets, the stars, and the power of sympathy, and many other things all together. So, and one of the common aspects between all of these manuscripts is the practice of graphophagy. So you want to create, like, you want to make a recipe of some kind with wine, with herbs, with something else. You want to write a formula on a piece of wood, for example. If you know Sigurdrifumaun, you will see that Sigurdur is taught this very specific technique by Sigurdrifa, by Brynhildr, the practice of carving words on wood and then scratching them off the surface, and then mixing all these words, all these woods, pieces of woods, in a cocktail of some kind and eat them. And that's how you activate runes in all Norse, in mythological tradition. But if you actually take manuscripts of medicine and magic, or so-called medicine and magic, you find that very same technique at work. You don't always find runes. Actually, you don't find runes, but you find the same approach. So writing words or carving words on some surface, and then scratching them off, mixing them with some drink, and drinking them. That's how this technique works. And these manuscripts here, especially Royal Irish Academy, especially AM 434, were really important within their context. They really circulated a lot. So they are not marginal works. So they kind of reflect the magical medical knowledge of the time, of their time. What's that time? It's around, on average, 1400 AD. So late medieval Scandinavia. So people believed in the powers of words, even when they were eaten. And this is exactly what I meant with sympathy, absorbing the power of something, the extra-linguistic powers of words in this case. And just to wrap things up, just add a few words about my latest interests concerning cultural memory and Old Norse mythology. And I'm just mentioning this, I don't want to bother you, but I'm just mentioning this because I will be talking about cultural memory and Old Norse mythology, especially the Fimbulvetr myth, at the second digital conference on next October of Norse mythology, which is going to take place in Brazil. Well, it's going to be online, but it's going to take place in Brazil. And I was invited just to talk about, Old Norse mythology and medievalism. So that's one of the latest interests that I developed in the last years. So I believe that that's a very intriguing aspect of mythology in general, not only of Old Norse mythology, because we as moderns, we are tempted to think that mythological tales are just stories that people made up in the past for some reason that we can't understand. And I definitely do not endorse this view. I definitely think that these stories must have been preserved because they were really, really important. And I am among those scholars who believe that the Fimbulvetr myth reflects a catastrophe that happened sometime. Maybe in 536 AD, maybe not, maybe at some other time. Some other scholars suggest that it may reflect, a volcanic eruption that occurred in the 10th century and that Germanic peoples and Vikings witnessed. It could very well be the case. But in any case, I think that the Fimbulvetr myth reflects the anxiety that people had when they witnessed some kind of catastrophe. They describe the end of the world, but they describe it in a way that is very, very consistent with what happens when we witness a massive volcanic eruption. So the sky is covered by a thick layer of ash, and the sun disappears. The stars and the moon disappear as well. the world seems to be at a crossroads, and probably is gonna end. So, and these stories were preserved for so long a time. But aside from this, I believe that these stories are still very relatable for us as well, and that is the reason why TV series, movies, literature, many of them, they are drawing upon Old Norse mythology and Ragnarok to remind us that we are about to experience, hopefully not, but we may be about to experience another global catastrophe. So we should use these old stories to remind ourselves that we are vulnerable, that we are not untouchable. So in my opinion, we are starting to reminding ourselves that mythology is a way to fight against cultural amnesia. We tend to forget that we are vulnerable, but now we are rediscovering it again, unfortunately. And so this is pretty much what I'm going to talk about in a month at this very, very interesting online conference that I am honored I was invited to. And so just to finish off, if you're interested in food and medieval Scandinavia, you might be interested in this volume that I edited alongside my colleague Victoria Gyönki. A volume, actually Victoria did most of the job, to be honest. And so we gathered a few of our colleagues in Iceland, and some of them, actually most of them, were the same guys that were in Leeds with me in 2016. And they also developed an interest in food-related topics, and so decided to make a book about this, because in my opinion, this topic is not very, very developed for what concerns medieval Scandinavia. So I encourage you and your fellow colleagues, PhD students, to study a little bit more everything concerning banqueting and feasts, because I believe that the sagas are incredibly rich in details that need to be unearthed. So this was our first attempt in this direction. Of course, this is not the first book in this topic, because there are other historians that have done excellent work, like Sverrir Thomasson, like Harry Notaker. But I think this book may hopefully encourage further debate. And these are some of the topics that we address. So production, consumption, not really recipes, not really cooking, if you're interested in that, but many other aspects concerning the table and eating together, and even supernatural elements as well. And just to conclude, just in a few days ago, this book was published, which I edited with another colleague of mine. Doesn't concern medieval Scandinavia, but let me take this chance to promote another colleague of mine who happens to be a former student of mine. She's currently a PhD student in Iceland. She's Beth Rogers. I didn't tell her that I would mention her today, so she didn't pay me to do so. But I mentioned this book because, again, it's brand new, and because inside this book there is a chapter on the milk-stealing witch in medieval Iceland, and is authored by Beth Rogers, who is, again, one of the scholars who are in these very days working at a PhD thesis on food history in medieval Iceland. So you may want to take her into account if you're interested in food history as well. So you can find this book in a few days in the publisher's website, in the Prevent Publishing website, and then I guess also online everywhere else. So that was pretty much what I had to say about my experiences.
Yes, it's amazing. One of the books that I most like is Food in Medieval Scandinavian. I think it was very interesting book that you made, and it's very interesting. The topic that you show us today, because when we talk about food, as I said, and sometimes we forget that food is more than only just simple eat. It's a thing that we can solve the politics, the some as I said, the marriage, the it's a very a demonstration of power. It's they have a lot of things that involve it, the the form that we eat, and this is very interesting to
Yeah,
solve.
food, for obvious reasons, because food pervades our reality. Food is what made us what we are now. After we started cooking food circa 2 million years ago, we started developing the brain we have now. After we invented agriculture, we created a civilization that brought us where we are now. And food is one of the few things that we have in nature to survive, not only as on a nutritional level, but also as a medicine. For the vast majority of our past, our medicine was our food, with some corrections, with some ingredients that you had to add, but pretty much that was our medicine. So again, as you correctly stated, there's so much more to food than just eating, starting from eating together, which makes a lot of difference than eating by ourselves. Eating together conveys a lot of additional meanings, and then everything else. So power, masculinity, femininity, marriage, politics, war, alliances, and as I try to show, medicine, magic, graphophagy, but also related to food, hunger, the fear of hunger. So agriculture, so much to food that is worth being explored. And the sagas, among other things, are very rich texts concerning these topics. So
Yes, it's a very amazing work that you do, because we can solve food in many other perspectives that, as you said, vulvas are very related with the eating heart for doing magic uh, divinations, or and that's very interesting because I was saw a documentary, a Danish documentary about Odin, and they show that some about a vulva that eating a heart to do his predictions,
yeah,
and that's very interesting because it shows how um, the the how can I say, the things that we eat have some specific things for us. Example, for a vulva eating a heart, we can solve that she using that for a medic belief, and that's amazing to see because or what it was described in a saga was finding more years and ago that Volvos was really eating hearts by the archaeologists
yeah,
discovered.
yeah, and not only they were eating something that other people were not eating, so the hearts, but according to Eric Sagarauda, they were also eating it from a special position in the whole. So on a days, right, on the most important place in the whole, higher than everybody else in a high society, right? Higher than everybody else. So she's a woman, but she's the most important figure in that society because she's gonna help everybody, and nobody can eat what she eats and where she eats. So again, as you say, that's one example of how what we eat builds our identity. The identity of a vulva clearly depends, among the things, on what she can eat and what others cannot.
Yes, that's true. That's fantastic thing about the different types of eating or food that was destined to some peoples and other peoples eating other things. It's
Yeah.
is a fantastic thing to analyze. Professor, I have to thank you so much for
Thank you.
be here with us and doing this amazing interview. I think it was one of the most that I like. It's the second interview that I do about foods in the Viking Age. The first was with Daniel Serra and Hannah
Right.
Thunberg, that
Nice.
they are very specialized in Viking Age food,
Yeah.
and I made very curious questions to them because it's one of the topics that I most like. I do courses about foods with Luciano de Campos, that was a member of the Navy, Nuclear
Hmm.
Studies Vikings and Scandinavians, and that's amazing because it was a very interesting subject that a lot of people want to know and want to comprehend about this period. So the people that love Viking Age and in Brazil, and persons that love this period are very curious about what they eat, what is important to the period. The some specifics. One of the most questions they do is about the berserks and the
Versus, yeah.
emotions
Yeah.
that was demystified by Professor Hannah, because she say that they don't eat mushrooms to became with her with the state of fury, uh, because if they eat that, they probably will not be able to fight,
Exactly.
and probably they don't eat the mushrooms, and mushrooms not are consumed in the Viking Age, that she said. And that's very interesting
Yeah.
to
Yeah. I agree.
and and thank you so much
Thank you. It
for
was a pleasure, and I hope I didn't bother you or your viewers and listeners. And I hope that we're gonna meet again at the conference next month.
yes, I will participate with the conference. I don't know if I will present some work I send, but they have to analyze and say if I can present my work. It was about the I think it's the first work that I will present about Scandinavian folklore. It's about the John Bauer paintings.
Okay. Okay. So you
And
still waiting for a response?
yes,
Okay.
yes, because I have a period that we send a work to present in in the conference, and we need to wait because you have other works that you present, and have the principals conference that you one of that was invited by then, and have you have these little presentations about specific topics in the
Yeah.
conference.
So you might be among these presentations, but you still don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
I waiting the answer about if my work will be part of the event.
Yeah, well, I wish you
But
good
I will
luck.
see your presentation because I am very fan of your work. I
Thanks.
really like this topic about the Viking and the Scandinavian, and that's very interesting.
Thanks a lot. So it was a pleasure, and I wish you good luck with your presentation being accepted.
Thank you. I will just stop the recording and I can talk to you a little more.
Okay, so great. Yeah, it was very fun. It was very fun.
Thank you.
So how many interviews have already